The Punic Wars, Part 2, Hannibal's audacious campaign. Hannibal, with audacious intent, aimed to invade the Apennine Peninsula directly through the Alps. A substantial 16,000-strong army was strategically left to defend Carthage itself, with a further complement of soldiers positioned in Spain. Hannibal, personally, with a formidable 92,000-strong army, commenced his audacious march towards the Alps. He first crossed the Ebro. On the northern bank of this river, Hannibal left 11,000 soldiers under the command of Hanno, and then, with the bulk of his forces, he traversed the Pyrenees. Gallic tribes, sensing opportunity, readily joined the Punics. Hannibal then crossed the Rhone, and in the late autumn, he began the perilous crossing of the snow-covered Alps. Having, against all odds, surmounted these treacherous mountains, the Carthaginian army descended into the fertile valley of the Po River and promptly captured Turin. This arduous 6-month campaign, however, cost Hannibal dearly. More than half of his army perished. Despite Gallic reinforcements, his force now numbered approximately 40,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. The Carthaginian commander, with typical cunning, sought to provoke the Romans into battle. The Punic cavalry crossed the Trebbia and moved towards the Roman camp. According to the Roman historian Sextus Julius Frontinus, Hannibal, having before him the camp of Consul Sempronius Longus, separated by a river, in severe frost placed his brother Mago with selected warriors in ambush. Then, to provoke the gullible Sempronius, he ordered the Numidian cavalry to approach his rampart, but at the first attack of ours to flee through the fords known to the Romans. The consul, attacking them and pursuing them with an army that had not yet eaten, froze it, crossing the river in severe cold. When soon the Romans became numb and weakened from hunger, Hannibal brought out his soldiers, whom he had previously specially warmed for this purpose with the help of fire, oil, and smoke. Mago also played his role, fulfilling his task of crushing the enemy's rear. In the ambush detachment, strategically located behind a stream, behind the right flank of the Carthaginian army, Hannibal had deployed the Sacred Detachment, an elite cavalry unit formed from representatives of Carthage's most noble families. When the Roman legions, already freezing, formed a battle order on the plain, Hannibal unleashed his experienced Balearic archers against them, whom Longus rather rashly opposed with novice velites. The latter could not withstand the attack and swiftly retreated behind the line of heavily armed warriors. These, in turn, broke through the front of the Gallic infantry, which formed the center of the Carthaginian army. The flanks of the Romans were then viciously attacked by Numidian cavalry and the ambush detachment, and were utterly defeated. As Polybius acutely observed, the rear ranks of the Romans, fighting in the center, suffered greatly from the attack of the warriors from the ambush, and those who were in front, inspired by the difficulty of the situation, gained the upper hand over the Celts and part of the Libyans, and broke through the battle line of the Carthaginians. Crucially, only 10,000 Romans in the center were able to break through the Gallic infantry and retreat, maintaining some semblance of battle order. The rest perished, were captured, or scattered. Hannibal, with a shrewd political move, released the Roman allies captured without ransom, hoping to entice them to his side in the fight against Rome. The road to Rome lay open before Hannibal, but he, perhaps surprisingly, chose to winter in Gaul. The catastrophe at Cannae, following the victory at Lake Trasimene, Hannibal once again did not proceed directly to Rome, but rather advanced into the rich region of Apulia. From Apulia, his army moved into Samnium and then into Campania. Fabius Maximus, adopting a cautious strategy, meticulously pursued Hannibal, deliberately avoiding direct engagement. Hannibal's forces, meanwhile, gradually diminished through minor skirmishes with the enemy, and significantly from disease. Concurrently, command of the Roman army was transferred from Fabius to the consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. The Roman public, understandably, expected decisive action from them. In the summer of 216 BC, the Carthaginians seized the Roman food depot in a fortification near the city of Cannae. Hannibal, with strategic foresight, set up camp here, calculating that the enemy would attempt to recapture the depot. On August 1st, Varro, rather rashly, led the troops into the field. Hannibal, ever proactive, attacked the Romans with cavalry and slingers even during their march. However, Varro managed to deploy his heavily armed warriors, who, with the assistance of the velites, successfully repelled the attack. The following day, Paulus assumed command. He positioned 2/3 of the army on the left bank of the Aufidus River and 1/3 on the right bank, 2 kilometers from the main camp. Hannibal, conversely, deployed his entire army against the main Roman forces. On the morning of August 2nd, the Roman legions from both camps meticulously lined up in battle order on the left bank of the Aufidus. On the left flank, adjacent to the river, stood the Roman cavalry, and on the right, the cavalry of their allies. The infantry, which formed the center, adopted a deeper formation than was customary. In front stood the light allied infantry. Hannibal formed his battle order in a similar fashion, with cavalry on the flanks, heavily armed infantry in the center, and slingers and archers in front of it. In the middle of his phalanx, he deliberately placed his less experienced Gauls and Iberians, whilst on the edges, he positioned his battle-hardened Libyans. The Carthaginian commander, as Polybius asserts, addressed his troops with a characteristically short speech. With victory in this battle, you will immediately become masters of all Italy. This one battle will end your current labors, and you will be possessors of all the riches of the Romans, becoming rulers and lords of all the earth. Therefore, no more words are needed, deeds are needed. Against the 4,000 Roman allied cavalry, Hannibal deployed 2,000 Numidian cavalry, and against the 2,000 Roman cavalry, he concentrated a formidable 8,000 men of heavy Carthaginian, Libyan, and light Iberian cavalry. The Carthaginian cavalry swiftly scattered the Roman horsemen, and then, with devastating effect, struck from the rear at the cavalry of the Roman allies. Meanwhile, the Roman infantry pushed back the Gauls in the center, but then found themselves under attack from 2 powerful Libyan flanks. The Roman legions were now, crucially, completely encircled. Here is how Titus Livy describes the horrifying finale of the battle. When there were few Romans left and they were exhausted from fatigue and wounds, they were put to flight, then all scattered, and those who could tried to find their horses to flee. The Romans fled in all directions. 7,000 men reached the smaller camp, 10,000 the larger one, and almost 2,000 to the village of Cannae itself. These latter were immediately surrounded by Carthage and his horsemen, as the village of Cannae was not protected by any fortifications. The other consul did not join any of the groups of fugitives, whether by chance or intentionally, but fled to Venusia with about 50 horsemen. It is said that 45,500 infantrymen, 2,700 horsemen, and almost as many citizens as allies were killed. Conflicting accounts and unanswered questions. There are conflicting data regarding the losses sustained in the Battle of Cannae. Titus Livy claims that 48,200 Romans and their allies were killed, and 19,500 were taken prisoner. Polybius, offering a grim alternative, believes that approximately 70,000 Romans were killed, and only a mere 3,000 managed to escape. Eutropius states that 60,000 infantrymen, 3,500 cavalrymen, and 350 senators and other nobles were killed in the Roman army. Orosius speaks of 44,000 killed and Florus of 60,000. Plutarch provides a figure of 50,000 killed. According to his information, 4,000 Romans were captured during the battle, and another 10,000 were taken later in both camps. The Carthaginian losses, according to Livy, amounted to 8,000 killed, and according to Polybius, a more modest 5,700. Among the Romans, tragically, Consul Aemilius Paulus, 21 military tribunes, and 80 senators were among the fallen. However, the figures relating to Roman losses and indeed the description of the battle's progression by Roman historians are, frankly, not worthy of unquestioning trust. The question of the sources from which Roman historians drew information about the Battle of Cannae, as well as about many other battles, remains open to scholarly debate. It is quite clear that the legionaries who survived the battle, and even centurions and tribunes, would not have been able to provide a more or less complete picture of the entire engagement. The relative completeness of information could only have been possessed by the surviving consul Terentius Varro, or someone from the senior officers closely associated with him. However, if one judges by the reports of the same Plutarch, Titus Livy, In Appian, the Roman commanders, already in the midst of the battle, lost control of their troops and did not know precisely what was transpiring. Evidently, the true picture of Cannae could only have been given to us by Hannibal or someone from his closest associates. But as far as is known, they did not leave memoirs, and if they did, they were lamentably not reflected in the historical tradition. History, as is often said, is written by the victors, and Carthage was utterly destroyed. And in the fires that engulfed the native city of the victor at Cannae, probably the Punic evidence of the wars with the Romans also perished. There is every reason to believe that Roman historians drew information about the Battle of Cannae from the surviving rank-and-file warriors and junior officers, whose stories merged into an epic narrative about the terrible disaster that befell the Roman army. To the defeated, of course, it seemed that the Punics were everywhere, and that most of their comrades had perished. But whether this was truly the case remains a significant question. The most perfect mystery indeed remains why the Roman infantry, despite successfully pushing back the Gauls, even when encircled, could not, as they had in the Battle of the Trebbia, break through the weakened enemy front, allegedly intentionally made by Hannibal in the center significantly thinner than on the flanks, and save themselves? Livy asserts. After prolonged and repeated efforts, the Romans, with their dense formation, representing an oblique line, broke the enemy phalanx, which was rare and therefore very weak, protruding from the rest of the formation. Extending the flanks further, the Carthaginians soon locked the enemy in from the rear as well. The Roman historian, it must be noted, in no way explains why the Romans suddenly ceased pursuing the already fleeing Gauls and Iberians. It would have been relatively easy for the velites and slingers to escape from the heavily armed enemy hoplites.